So guys, before we begin, you should know that my AC is not working properly, which means you will see me sweat a lot. But घबराओ नहीं, ये तो खुशी के पसीने हैं. Of course, we've had a historic election now, and before we really get into the video, I know the first question a lot of people will ask is, what does politics have to do with cinema? You are cinema wali. Why you are discussing politics? Please stick to cinema. Please don't talk. Listen, all art is political, and secondly, everything else in the world, literally everything that exists, is political. If you really think about it, anything about which laws can be made is political. And that is anything. Now, it's not just that things are legally changing or that the landscape of the country has been changed by law, but there is a significant cultural shift in these past 10 years that we have seen. But first, let's talk about how these elections went. So, of course, everyone sort of thought, by everyone I obviously mean us, the urban elite who sit in our drawing rooms and don't know anything about the country, a lot of people thought that Modi is coming back with a huge mandate, right? And clearly we were wrong. What has happened is that it's not just the brand of Hindutva which has been contained, but it is also the masculinity that this Hindutva and that Modi's language, Modi's personality and everything about Modi represents. And that directly correlates to the kind of men, to the kind of masculinity we have seen in cinema and appreciated over this decade. So let's break it down. Now, you'll understand that when Modi speaks about himself, usually in the third person, not anymore of course, because now there are two other people to consider, he would always display himself as a strong man. That's where the 56-inch ka Sina thing came, and then it was discussed online how even Dwayne The Rock Johnson doesn't have a 56-inch ka Sina. So wah Modi ji wah. This is just one example of the kind of masculinity that he's trying to associate himself with. This masculinity is the same that relates to these wars, attacks, surgical strikes becoming national issues over and over and over again. This is where we think about what Kunal Kamra said.
पाकिस्तान का कॉन्फ्लिक्ट सॉल्व हो गया ना तो गवर्नमेंट के पास कोई एक्सक्यूज बचेगा नहीं. समझ रहा है तू? फिर तू पूछेगा मेरे को साफ पानी क्यों नहीं मिल रहा है. अब तो सियाचिन में हमारे जवान लड़ भी नहीं रहे.
The hyper-masculinity of these subjects, including things like we are going to destroy mosques and we are going to dominate as a religion, these are all aggressive narratives that push this sort of hyper-masculinity forward. Now, why am I saying that these things are related to cinema? So let's talk about misogyny in cinema. First of all, what is the difference between portraying misogyny and having a misogynistic film? So let's take the example of Gangs of Wasipur. Now, we can't say that, it's not trying to glorify violence, it's not. Yes, of course it's not. But it is true that some people will take the film's messaging to heart and believe that this is the kind of masculine I want to be, gali galoch and katta and whatnot. But the fact is that Gangs of Wasipur does try to make a statement, especially when you look at this dialogue by Ramadhir Singh, where he clearly tells you what the visual portrayal of the film is trying to achieve.
सबके दिमाग में अपनी अपनी पिक्चर चल रही है. सब साले हीरो बनना चाह रहे हैं अपनी पिक्चर में. ये साला हिंदुस्तान में जब तक सलीमा है लोग बनते रहेंगे.
Now, this clip is telling you the ideology of the film, that it is trying to show you the reality of action in real life, where there is awkwardness, there is filth, there is gore, but in the minds of the characters who enact this violence, it is some sort of heroism or herogiri as we call it in Hindi. So in a way, the film did carry this message and intelligent audiences were able to read it. I have to discuss this. On the other hand, we had this film last year that people just couldn't ignore. I mean, I wish we had all ignored it. I also got pulled into talking about it at one point, and I had to write a watch-along review on Instagram stories just to get people off me every time I expressed an opinion about it, I was told that you should watch it before you say anything. I was like, what is there to watch? I know what this film is. And when I watched it, I realized that, oh, it's not as bad as I thought. It's so much worse, because I was also bored throughout the film. This film, however, is not about me. It's not talking to me. It's talking to an audience which will appreciate this hypermasculinity, this toxicity. The way it treats women is something that the director has gone ahead and spoken about loudly everywhere. The film is trying to pull the audience into the protagonist's shoes. So it's giving you this angle that, oh, he's angry and sad about his dad. Somehow it is used to justify the violence of the film. And really, the violence isn't that shocking or anything. If anyone here has seen Old Boy or any Tarantino film, I mean, this film really doesn't have anything shocking, nor is its portrayal of women shocking. But the fact is that even in this film, it is shown that the women grovel at the feet of the man who is the alpha. This is not the only film. There have been so many films, and listen, a lot of people tell me to talk about Telugu films on this channel. In the past, when I have tried to talk about toxicity in South Indian cinema specifically, for example, this scene from Kantara, which it's played like a joke, and when a woman is randomly slapped in some Telugu films, like there is no justification given, and the woman doesn't do anything about it either. It's just there. It's like a normal thing that happens in a lot of Telugu films and even Kannada films, now that I've talked about Kantara. So the problem is not just that it is there in South Indian films. The problem is that it came into the mainstream of the entire country. People were appreciating that South films are being appreciated. The problem is that it's not the good ones, right? It's not the Kumbalangi Nights or the Kakamotais of the world that are really going mainstream. It's always some hyper masculine film like RRR. The thing about these films is all these men and all these types of masculinity are all about brute force. Even if you look at a film like Jallikattu, there is violence against women, there is a madness, but the film is a clear critique of this very masculinity, which it equates with basically being jungly or being back in the Stone Age, and it's not appreciating it. But the funny thing is, in this other film that I'm talking about right now, they appreciate the ways of the Stone Age man, the culture of being alpha in a pack of wolves in the early days when there were no poets or whatever. Okay, then what time are we living in now? We are in the 21st century, and as you think about it, you will realize that in the political context also, the right wing pushed a lot of these things about the past. If you've been watching Dhruv Rathi videos, you know all this Chanakya Niti and everything about us being oppressed in the past and bringing back the glory of India, and it's all stuck in the past. And if you talk about the future, they will give you a future which is out of your reach. They will talk about huge high rises that the poor or the middle class can't afford to get into, or they will talk about huge airports that ultimately are hollow on the inside because there's terrible service. This is an entire image of this shallow masculinity, this shallow sort of growth, which is actually regression disguised as growth. So what is a good way to counter it? In all of these stories I mentioned, what is important is that none of the men are really underdogs. An underdog is someone who has something lacking in their life, but especially in their personality. They have to overcome something. They have to develop by the end of the film. And unlike in RRR, where all that happens is that, oh, Komaran Bhim learns that, oh, I have to fight for the nation. Hello, excuse me, by the way, they have destroyed the history of the actual historical figures on whom the film is based, because according to one small Wikipedia search, of course you can verify it on legitimate searches, Komaran Bhim was actually against landlords more than anything else, and he was actually fighting the Adivasi cause. So these things have been erased in the mainstream, while hypermasculinity kept going on the rise, something very interesting started happening on this side. Number one, Rahul Gandhi started his Bharat Jodo Yatra, okay? I feel like a lot of people in our elite circles were not really taking it seriously. But I was watching it throughout and I thought, hey, this guy is actually attracting a lot of crowds. A lot of people are joining in it. It's seemingly having an impact, but everyone is saying otherwise, so maybe I'm wrong. At the same time, maybe not at the same time, maybe earlier or later or whenever, somewhere in the middle, Shah Rukh Khan started to come out with films like Pathan and Jawan. Now, Pathan, in most ways, is also a sort of hyper masculinity. But like I've mentioned in my video earlier, the name Pathan and the identity of the Pathan, which he gets from an Afghan village, goes completely against the Hindutva masculinity that we are just talking about. It's not regressive. It fights for the nation in the true sense of the term. It makes allies. It doesn't just see any Pakistani is my enemy. It kind of makes friends on the way. Okay, so it's a complicated issue. It's still a hyper-masculine film, but it is trying to cut through this barrage of hyper-masculine films that we've seen. And a few months later, we had Jawan. Now, Jawan, we all know what it is. It is an outright criticism of the government that we've had for 10 years, where people have been oppressed, people have been destroyed for doing their jobs, and poor people have been in extreme distress. Of course, this is expected from a Tamil filmmaker because these kinds of films are very common in the South where a political statement is made. The most important thing about this film is that in an era where everyone was scared to say anything out loud, because this same hypermasculinity, which makes people think of themselves as strong men who can do whatever they want, it pushes them to give rape threats, death threats to anyone who criticizes them or the government or the idea of Modi or any sort of right-wing idea that they follow. But in Jawan, Shah Rukh Khan not just works with a group of women, but he talks about the distress of everyone across the country. He stands with farmers and with doctors and with every person who cares about this country, and then finally makes an outright appeal to people to not vote on the basis of religion, caste, etc. In this film, Shah Rukh Khan brought the focus back to the actual issues that people are facing. This is still strong. This is still masculinity. This is still fighting against the system. But he is not a rebel without a cause. He has a very meaningful message by the end. Now, not every film has to have a meaningful message, but it should not also have a destructive message either. Coming back to Rahul Gandhi, a lot of people recently on Twitter, after everything that went down, were very surprised when a lot of people, including me, started sharing edits of Rahul Gandhi where we all perceived him as being very attractive, and there was some very creatively sexual advances made on Twitter. It was very interesting and very beautiful to see all these repressed people coming out and talking about this man in this way. But what's interesting is that a lot of people who don't like him were shocked at this development. They said, you find him attractive? What? Like, what is so attractive about him? He doesn't have a chappan inch. He doesn't do scripted interviews. He doesn't consider himself God. So what is so great about him? So here's what I gathered from everyone's reaction. Now, Rahul Gandhi obviously had his image tarnished over the years, and this was a properly orchestrated campaign against him. But what happened is, after a lot of failures, when he rebuilt himself with the Bharat Jodo Yatra, two things happened. The first was that it turned out that there are people who support him, mostly the poor, the marginalized, and those working at the ground level. And secondly, when he took this yatra, suddenly his image was reformed. His gruffness and his being down there on the ground working with people, it made one thing very clear. It's that he's not afraid to talk to the public and that he is grounded. Now look at the difference between Modi and Rahul Gandhi in this matter. So a lot of people relate to Modi because of his language, but it's the worst form of language, right? So when he talks about Mamata Banerjee in this way, or when he
ये संपत्ति इकट्ठी करके किसको बांटेंगे? जिनके ज्यादा बच्चे हैं उनको बांटेंगे.
So a lot of the public does find him relatable, but he's appealing to the public's lowest tendencies, the darkest, the dirtiest parts of us, which generally have to be repressed or suppressed to survive in society, but he brings them to the top. But Rahul Gandhi, what he has done is he's gone out and spoken to people on the ground. He's hugging men, women, children, old people, everyone equally, talking to them, listening to them, walking with them, not being afraid to be assaulted by crowds. And that made him relatable to the positive parts of us, the parts of us that want a better nation, that wants growth, that doesn't necessarily want the marginalized to be marginalized forever. Now Rahul Gandhi started to appeal to our better tendencies, and that is why he brought back the trope that has been missing in mainstream Indian cinema, in the popular narratives for a while, which is the underdog. Remember the underdog stories? Remember Lagan? Remember the beauty of someone who has no power pushing through, and not just on his own, but with teamwork, with nation building, with bringing together people by destroying the worst parts of them. That is what a leader should be about, in my mind. Now, I'm not saying that Rahul Gandhi is the epitome of leadership or anything of that sort, but he apparently embodied this through his social media. Of course, his social media team has done a great job in that matter. Now, that was one of the impacts of this yatra and his portrayal. If you think back to the way the BJP treats women and the way it has talked about women in the past, you will realize that when they pushed aside women like Mahua Moitro, or when they ran narratives on TV, they were demonizing women who were either feminists, or they were upstanding, or they stood for themselves. So this sort of a narrative is a very important feature of toxic masculinity, that a woman who stands on her own, holds her ground, or is not subscribing to this idea that yes, you are the alpha and I submit to you, she is a demon. This is broken down again now after these elections, because Mahua Moitra is back in parliament, and it's not just women, it's a lot of Dalit women, a lot of Adivasis, a lot of different diverse voices that have come back into the forefront. And all this time when BJP kept saying that we will be the single largest party, or we will have one nation, one election, we are the only one, I am the only one who represents the nation, I represent everyone, and anyone who goes against me is wrong, or an anti-national, or a terrorist, that has all been debunked. Because guess what? The fact is that our nation stands on plurality. We have always been a very diverse nation, and we hold on to these delicate strings of being attached to each other by tolerating each other and our differences, but ultimately we want to live happily and peacefully along with each other. Nobody really wants to fight, nobody really wants to hate. It is mostly the elite who are having a sort of a sad life and don't know who to blame because they are not educating themselves in terms of political science and other humanities subjects. They are the ones who get pushed into this narrative that oh no, it's the Muslims who are the problem, or it's all these urban Naxals who are the problem. But ultimately, we are slowly trying to come back towards a pluralistic society where positive masculinity is rewarded, where hyper masculinity, even though it will always exist in society, it isn't the only narrative anymore. That is why it's very important when we see that a film like Lapata Ladies has done so well on Netflix as compared to that other film that we were talking about. It is important to support the films that are about good men, good women, underdogs, the marginalized, the Dalits, the Adivasis, different people in this country who are fighting their own battles. Show the bad parts of them, show the good parts of them, show them as being flawed, show them as being kind, show them as being evil, show them as being dirty, show them as being ashamed, show them in all the different forms that they can be. And that will truly bring cinema forward on the world stage, where you want to be so desperately clearly all these people in this country. And one of the significant achievements, of course, recently, Payal Kapadia winning the Cannes Grand Prix through a film about women in Mumbai. And this is the kind of cinema that the world will turn around and watch. So it's not RRR's hypermasculinity that we should stay attached to for the rest of our lives. Sure, masala films will be appreciated every now and then when you create a great spectacle. But spectacle without substance is never the answer. It is never enough. So to make cinema that is not just good but great, we have to make sure that we don't lose this diversity that we are finally clinching at again, and we do not fall for false narratives like a coalition government is unstable, because guess what, it's instability that brings checks and balances and accountability into the government. That is how good work is done. That is how bulldozer raj ends. That is how the narrative of one man's hypermasculinity is destroyed. So it is humbling for some people to know that they are still in a democracy, but for me personally and for a lot of others,
लेखिका अरुंधति रॉय और कश्मीर के डॉक्टर शेख शौकत हुसैन के खिलाफ यूएपीए के तहत मुकदमा चलाने की अनुमति दी है।
इतना ही नहीं, प्रशासन की कार्रवाई में 11 घरों को भी ढहा दिया गया। आरोप यह है कि जिन घरों को ढहाया गया है उनमें गौ कशी होती थी।
it is a great time to be Indian. So thank you guys for watching this video. Please let me know what you think. Who were you supporting this election? And if you were supporting BJP, then why do you watch my content? I don't understand. But chalo theek hai, wo bhi acha hai. There should be some plurality, as I said. But let me know if you like this video, don't like this video. Give me a like or don't give me a like. Whatever you want to do, you can share it if you want. And I will see you next time. Bye.